All of politics is storytelling, and all stories are political. As I've been studying to become a history teacher, I realize more and more how narratives ensconce our entire experience of the past. I think growing up, I had this naive idea that there was a certain and true history, an absolute truth of record about what had happened in the past. The reality is so much messier than I could have pictured, and while there are certain sources more authentic than others, the truth is that history and politics are tales. Tales spun by the currents of humanity that ride on an almost uncountable number of factors. It has been said countless times that history tends to repeat itself. This is posited as human nature is somewhat concrete and historical currents push culture and nations one way or the other. While this idea holds tremendous merit, the way in which we remember and record these stories, influenced by cultural and environmental factors, also colors their seeming repetition. So let me tell you a few stories. Our first one starts in Boston, Massachusetts in 1949. The city was in a major transition period. Racial tensions were simmering as desegregation was slowly being implemented and the city was radically reshaped by new urban projects and deindustrialization. The Cold War was in full swing and Harry Truman was promising to make the American people a fair deal. In Beantown, politician Walter O'Brien is desperately attempting to win the mayorship, and it's not going well. He is quickly running out of campaign funds and is desperate to spread his populist left-wing message in whatever way he can. As the race wears on, O'Brien turns to one last effort to get the word out. A highly unorthodox campaign method for the time. He hires local folk bands in the area to record various campaign songs and blast these songs on a loudspeaker fastened to a truck. Side note, O'Brien would be fined a whopping $10 for disturbing the peace due to this stunt. This stunning move would miraculously end up winning O'Brien the race in an incredible victory. He would be swept into office with an incredible Okay, I'm sorry. The truth is, as you can probably imagine, the voters did not appreciate blatant noise pollution from an upstart left-wing politician they had never heard of. O'Brien would come in dead last with 1.2% of the vote. He would quickly fall into obscurity, retiring in Maine with his wife to work at a library. Nearly all of these campaign songs were lost to time, in fact. No record remains of any of those tunes blasted during those cold Boston mornings. Except one. MTA.
Well, let me tell you of the story of a man named Charlie on a tragic and fateful day. He put 10 cents in his pocket, just his wife and family went to ride on the MTA. Well, did he ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unlearned. What a pity. He may ride forever 'neath the streets of Boston.
This song, written by Jacqueline Steiner and Bex Lomax Haas, was officially recorded nearly 10 years after the campaign, and was brought to life when a waiter who had remembered hearing it during O'Brien's run brought it up to folk singer Will Holt at the Purple Onion nightclub in New York City. While Holt was the first to record the song for his album The World of Will Holt, the song really became a hit when the famous folk band The Kingston Trio ripped it, altered it, and re-released it. Nationwide, this song instantly gained popularity. My father, born in 1950, grew up learning how to play it on guitar and performed it for me frequently in my childhood. I remember falling in love with it. The guitar, drums, and lyrics drove the narrative forward at a breakneck pace, much like the trains being described therein. As I listened and re-listened to the song, the full scale of the tale being spun began to be laid bare. Simply put, the song is a message to fight fare increases in Boston. It utilizes the sympathetic fictional commuter Charlie to show the dangers of exit fares, a complicated policy in use at the time that required riders to pay a certain amount based on the stop they were getting off on. Throughout O'Brien's campaign, he had promised to end these fares if elected. This song, like many others of the time, follows the pattern recounting an urban legend-like narrative. It opens with Bob Shane, the lead vocalist for the Kingston Trio, somberly stating a prologue. He appealed to the tradition of Bostonians' patriotism.
These are the times that try men's souls. In the course of our nation's history, the people of Boston have rallied bravely whenever the rights of men have been threatened.
He goes on to outline how the MTA, the song's main villain, is continuing to burden the citizens of Boston with high fares to ride the metro. The prologue ends with this eerie line.
Hear me out. This could happen to you.
The tune then shifts from a slow and dragging violin underlying the prologue to a classic upbeat folk rhythm with some of the best banjo riffs I have ever heard. We are told of the aforementioned Charlie. He arrives at the train station with 10 cents, unaware of the fare increase. He has a wife, a family, a job. He is in fact the quintessential American through which we can experience the strange and unjust consequences of poor governance. Charlie attempts to transfer trains, getting off at the Jamaica Plain station, and the conductor insists that he pay the exit fare before he leaves. In horror, Charlie realizes that he is 5 cents short. Because of this bureaucratic mix-up, the logical conclusion is that Charlie must remain on the train for eternity.
But did he ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unlearned. He may ride forever 'neath the streets of Boston. He's a man who never returned.
Charlie, barreling through the dark depths of the bowels of Boston, is left to ponder in anger and confusion how this happened. How the local governance of the city would make it so difficult to get around, restricting his freedom of movement to the point where he will die on a train car. My absolute favorite verse in this song describes his wife, in abject sorrow and grief, going to the station every day to throw him a sandwich through the train window as it soars past the platform. The message is clear. Charlie will never return, and his predicament should be a rallying cry for all who value justice.
Fight the fare increase, vote for George O'Brien, get for Charlie off the MTA. Or else
It is up to you to use your political will to save Charlie. They are making it clear that apathy will only serve to doom this seemingly immortal commuter, thundering right below our feet. His absence will in fact serve as a reminder of our inability to push for fair policies. He is the man who never returned. This song is clearly not taking itself seriously. Perhaps the original version for the O'Brien campaign did, but the modifications made by the trio have created an incredibly comedic tone. The final line of the song, in fact,
Hey to Charlie.
is a parody of the famous line said by Julius Caesar after being stabbed to death by his best friend. The trio is clearly winking and nodding at the audience, acknowledging the ridiculousness of the song's message. Laughing and giggling can be heard in the recording, and at one point, Davey, the banjo player, breaks the fourth wall and remarks on how tired he is of playing banjo. Moreover, the entire premise, a man being stuck in the train forever simply because he does not have a nickel, is of course ridiculous and farcical. One can see why this message did not quite resonate with voters in the 1950s. As I listened to this song over the years, in conjunction with my deeper exploration of history, I found it to be filled with deeper meaning, and even somewhat connected to one of the most horrifying political techniques ever used. But we will get there. This song is political, even in its iteration by the trio. There are several key moments within that appeal to American patriotism. In the midst of one of the choruses, a background singer can be heard comparing the mythical Charlie to Paul Revere, a character of the American Revolution that we now recount as having a much bigger historical role than is verifiable. While more real than Charlie, the details surrounding Paul Revere's ride are hazy, and he was by no means the most important messenger that night. However, Paul now serves as a symbol. An important and widespread symbol of American pride. Charlie, in his own way, has his own midnight ride, although it is aboard a metal railway car, not atop a steed. The setting of this song can also not be overlooked. If you grew up in the public school system of the United States, you most likely learned about the imperative role that the city of Boston played in this country's independence. The trio appeals to the Bostonian sense of national pride and connects the citizens of Boston to a long line of Americans who stood up for the rights of all, who stood up for sovereignty and freedom. Additionally, the lyrics compare the fare increase to a burdensome tax, taxes being another incredibly common theme of government incursion we see in the American Revolution. This entire song seems to be staging a battle, albeit a completely fictional one, between the patriots who want to save Charlie and pay less for the Boston Metro, and those ruthless oligarchs and bureaucrats who want nothing more than to line their own pockets with the drippings of bloated city budgets. While this song is making a joke out of its own circumstances, the political theater that it is manifesting and tactics of myth-making it utilizes have had very real implications and have been used for much more deadly purposes. In fact, enough of Charlie for now. Let's move on to another story, one that was quite pervasive during the very same era. This is a story about the spirit of the United States, the people that make up the greatest country on the planet. It is 1950. World War II has passed, and our great country is now the most powerful and richest on Earth. We bravely won the war for the Allies, and our citizens now get to enjoy the freedom and quality of life only dreamed of by most of the world's population. Unfortunately, however, the vanquishing of the evil Nazi and Imperial Japanese forces did not secure total global peace. A new adversary has arisen, one which threatens not only the safety of our great nation, but also the very way of life we all hold so dear. To the east, one of our former allies, the Soviet Union, is attempting global domination through their backwards ideology of collectivism. Communism, as it's called, has become a serious scourge being spread by the USSR and has reached as far as Asia and deep into South and Central America. The United States, too, is not impervious. Thousands of our own citizens have been affected by secret infiltrators and are working to change our homeland into one resembling a socialist hellscape. Under this new rule, you will lose all personal freedoms and be thrust into abject poverty. Under this new rule, the government will be run by a dictator to whom you will owe all your personal wealth and property. The spirit of entrepreneurship that is solely responsible for this country's success will be cast aside, and a naive atmosphere of fairness will pervade public policy. Wealth will be totally redistributed, and the art and creativity that can only be produced by a population that respects individuality will become part of a bygone era. This threat will ensconce us if the United States does nothing. If we sit idly by while the world adopts this horrifying set of beliefs, we have a duty as Americans to root out the invaders in our midst. We must find anyone who is flirting with communism and make absolutely certain that they cannot affect the minds of policymakers, or God forbid, our children. Whoever is known to be a communist will be routinely ousted. We shall expose their political operations. Do not work with these communists. Do not support their businesses, or else you risk financially bolstering those who want the death of the American way. But please, don't despair or spiral. Our government is hard at work. Joseph McCarthy, the senator from Wisconsin, is helping us as he conducts a full overview of the internal affairs of the U.S. government as well as civilian operations. He, as well as many other patriotic Americans, are making sure these communist and Soviet sympathizers are punished for their wrongdoings. If you ever expect someone of collaboration with communists, you have a national duty on par with your obligation to vote to report them. You can protect the United States from collapse. But it takes vigilance and the resolute loyalty of Americans from California to Georgia. The Reds have no place here and never will. This was the tale being spun by the US government as MTA was piercing the ears of Bostonian voters. The era of the Second Red Scare had arrived, and it was federal policy to screen populations both internally and externally for compliance and dedication to the American way of life.
Don't believe you have the right to ask the question of anybody.
It's very apparent that you're following the same line of these other witnesses.
I am following no line.
Which is definitely the communist line.
I am using my own head, which I shall continue to do.
You're excused, and if you want to make a speech, go out here under one of the big trees and sound off.
Wait, what is the American way of life? Well, that is another tale altogether, but to put it simply, capitalism and a belief in American superiority, morally and otherwise. Joseph McCarthy ended up ruining the lives of hundreds of American citizens on the accusation of communism. Once labeled a communist by McCarthy or the House Un-American Activities Committee, one would struggle to find a job and be seen as a traitor. Some of the more famous of these cases were that of J. Robert Oppenheimer, Owen Latmore, Pete Seeger, and Paul Robeson. The last two of these were singers, who were blacklisted from the industry because of their left-leaning politics, and Robeson even had his passport revoked. However compelling the story may have been, the truth is Senator McCarthy was a paranoid opiate addict who saw communists everywhere and was eventually censured by the Senate due to his reckless accusations and blatant witness intimidation. Even President Eisenhower saw McCarthy's methods as extreme. Our song here, MTA, actually has an Easter egg that hints at this era of political persecution. As I have said, this song was written for Walter O'Brien, but this is what we get in the song instead.
And pay, fight the fare increase, vote for George O'Brien, get for Charlie of the MTA.
The party that Walter O'Brien belonged to, the Progressive Party, was quite left-leaning for its time, and as such was seen as comparable or at least sympathetic to the underground communist movement. To make it worse, in 1954, Boston ad executive Herbert Philbrick testified in front of a federal Senate Internal Security Subcommittee that he had gone to communist meetings with Walter O'Brien and knew him to be a member of the Communist Party. Less than a year later, the Massachusetts Commission on Communism published a list of 85 people they claimed were present or former communists. Walter and Laura O'Brien, his wife, appeared on this list and were thus blacklisted from politics forever. As aforementioned, this led the O'Briens to disappear from public life entirely. In some ways, Walter O'Brien was the man who never returned. The Kingston Trio realized that having Walter O'Brien's name in their hit might attract, let's just say, uncomfortable attention from the federal government. Just like we do in so much of our retelling of history, the Kingston Trio modified the story. They switched from Walter to George, and no one was the wiser. No one knew or cared enough to seek the truth. With this alteration, the song almost slides into the world of the fully fictional. It becomes a parody of itself. The vestiges of authentic political thought, the sincere progressive goal of free public transport, it is all stripped away and we are left with a goofy anecdote. McCarthy was not totally responsible for this poisoned political atmosphere, however. He was more of a symptom. After World War II, the story I laid out was perverse, and Americans truly feared the scourge of a communist takeover. This tale served the interest of the ruling class and the United States military by giving us a valid justification for trampling on the liberties of those at home and abroad. We were the only ones, it was said, that were powerful enough to stop the USSR. Capitalism had to be maintained, and if another country favored another path, then they would be persuaded to change their mind. This persuasion usually looked like murder, incarceration, and the lack of anything resembling diplomacy or respect for sovereignty. The Cold War was only cold in the most overt sense. Americans and Russians did not die in the millions, but this ideological battle cast a horrifying shadow across nearly every part of the developing world and swallowed up the self-determination for those populations. These stories, the stories told by McCarthy or Stalin or by the Kingston Trio, all have agendas, of course, all have their own driving forces. It is up to those of us who study history to attempt to read stories, as many as we can, and try and figure out the material truth of the situation. We must try to piece together parts of many of these stories to frankly, vaguely establish what the fuck is going on, and how others have tried to stop what the fuck is going on. If you are moderately aware of leftist thought over the past 100 years and hear me harping on this idea of story and of the US government using narratives to create the justifications for evil action, you may be thinking about one Mr. Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky was a writer whose seminal work, Manufacturing Consent, mainly focused on how large corporate news agencies feed propaganda to the public in order to satisfy the ruling class. It is in the best interest, Chomsky writes, for news agencies, which themselves are giant private properties owned by wealthy business people, to maintain the status quo. To challenge the ruling class would be to challenge their own owners in a sense. Essentially, if one wants to report news that is in conflict with the ruling class's wishes, they will get slowly pushed to the sidelines and lose their access to sources until they fade into obscurity. Or worse, they will receive the most honorable award an American journalist can. It is also important to note that these news agencies are in the business of making money, and so to them, eyeballs are everything. Individual journalists also self-censor, not necessarily on a conscious level or because they think they would get fired if they wrote something specifically, but more because their opinion of what is newsworthy is shaped by the dominant ideology of the society, in this case, a capitalist one. As Chomsky puts it, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. These stories, the way news agencies choose to cover them, create history. When I want to write a research paper on Botswana in World War I or on municipal infrastructure plans in Detroit in 1973, I look at the record of newspapers. While there are civilian accounts that have survived and inform the details of history, for the most part, history is recorded by journalists. Journalists who are subject to the phenomenon of self-censorship I mentioned. So we look back on the long story of history and see it littered with the personal bias of the time. We see the undercurrent of the dominant power structure. Quick side note, I am aware of the complicated nature of Noam Chomsky, and seeing that picture of him with you-know-who broke my heart deeply. Regardless, his political philosophy is somewhat useful in my analysis, but seriously, though, Jesus. As Americans, when we hear the word propaganda, we usually think of countries like Nazi Germany, or Iran, or North Korea. The word conjures up images of state-run media spinning obvious lies and half-truths to support a party line. Propaganda surely does not apply to my sources, the information I get from the state and the news agencies. This idea of an independent media and unbiased reporting, however, is the very result of indoctrination. We have been raised to think of America as a place where freedom of expression is protected and the truth is sought above all else. This is simply anathema to the truth. Corporate media lies to us all, and subtly or overtly supports mistruths that serve to shape our perception. This reminds me of a conversation I had with my mother a few years ago about China. I told her that China was gaining influence diplomatically and financially, and that in not too long they may overtake the dominance globally that the US currently possesses. She has always been a liberal, a very progressive person, but when I said this, she began to question China's motives. In her inquiry, she began to sound as confused, frightened, and accusatory as some of the more conservative politicians in our government. I asked why she was sounding so xenophobic, and she stopped and was taken aback. She simply remarked, "I guess I'm kind of scared of China, and I'm not quite sure why." Now, this is not to say that the era of Chinese global hegemony is inevitable and will only be benevolent. There are absolutely many valid criticisms for the action of China's government. The point is that once my mom, a woman who her whole life has only received news from mainstream sources, was told that the US might lose its grip as the world's only superpower, a subconscious response manifested, and she became extremely uncomfortable. Even as a liberal and progressive, the conditioning of the ruling class had penetrated. I, myself, have certainly not escaped it. I know that there are things I don't discuss simply because they are not in the bounds of political discourse, simply because I cannot conceive of them. Americans have the freedom of speech to say whatever they want, it seems, but there are certain things they simply won't say. When the Berlin Wall fell and there was an opening of communication between East and West, it was found that media consumers of the communist side were much more adept at being able to tell when lies were being told by their state media. The Western side, in contrast, seemed to accept what was reported as fact. This is due in part to the fact that the state media on the Eastern side was so deeply overt with its propaganda, it was easy to ascertain that the communists were going to only report what was in the party line. In Western Berlin, viewers had this idea that the media was independent, driven by free enterprise. This clouded their judgment and hindered their ability to separate the truth from the useful lies. That's how I believe us Americans operate. The only reason we do not believe our media and state are reporting propaganda is because it is very good propaganda. Time for another story. One I am sure if you are watching this video, you know well. This is the story about the spirit of the United States, the people that make up the greatest country on the planet. It is 2003. 9/11 has shaken this country to its core. A new adversary has arisen, one which threatens not only the safety of our great nation, but also the very way of life we all hold so dear. To the east, one of our former allies, Iraq, is attempting global domination through their ideology of radical Islam. Jihad is a scourge upon the Middle East, being spread by the Iraqi ground forces. Thousands of our citizens have already died, and while we know that Iraq is not housing those responsible for the attacks on 9/11, we are sure that Hussein and his regime harbor similar views towards the United States. They burn our flag and shred pictures of our politicians. More importantly, we have good reason to believe that they are building something that will lead to the complete annihilation of our great people. We have been told by our leaders, trusted leaders like the venerated Secretary of State Colin Powell, that Saddam Hussein is developing biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons and plans to unleash these on his regional neighbors and ultimately on the United States. The evidence can be seen in the satellite imagery and secret intelligence gathered within Iraq. The United States has a responsibility to eliminate this threat, lest we suffer another attack like we did in New York only 2 years ago. It is time to strike back with full force. Saddam was given a chance by George H.W. in the Gulf War to retreat and reconstitute his armed forces. We cannot give him that chance now. No matter what it takes, we will eliminate this despotic leader. Regime change in Iraq will additionally have a democratizing effect on a region chock full of theocracy and lawlessness. This is why we go to war, to protect ourselves and to spread peace. The United States is the only one who deserves to be the most powerful one in the room because everyone else simply has worse ideals. There we are. That is a story I'm sure you all know well, the justification for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I am sure I need not remind you that nearly all the intelligence that supported the WMD theory was found to be faulty. The invasion went down as one of the biggest black marks on American history in the past 75 years. Between 200 to 300,000 Iraqi civilians died in this over 8-year-long war. What was the real reason for the invasion? Well, that depends on who you ask, but I will say that the resources of the region, mainly large oil deposits, certainly played a factor in establishing U.S. presence there. The United States Armed Forces were able to secure access to large amounts of these oil fields in Iraq and made international fossil fuel conglomerates a lot of money. Saddam Hussein was apprehended on December 13th, 2003 in the U.S.-led Operation Red Dawn, and after 3 years of imprisonment, tried by an Iraqi tribunal. He was hanged on a cold winter morning, and the region immediately experienced whatever the opposite of a democratizing effect is. Iraq was plunged into chaos as no solid power structure was left. The surrounding nations of Iran and Syria did not in fact instantly elect queer leaders, abandon religion, and begin construction on a Bass Pro Shop. In fact, the invasion and destruction the US wrought made everyone pretty fucking nervous and adversarial towards the West. The point is that the story of invading Iraq was complicated. While there were many at the time who believed an invasion of the country was foolhardy and only masking seedier American interests, a Pew Research poll at the time showed 73% of Americans in favor of military action in Iraq to end Hussein's rule. The Bush administration had created a ruse, an elaborate one, to convince the public that this costly and unnecessary invasion was in their best interests. The ruling class and presidential admin cared about working to manufacture consent, and unlike O'Brien and his story of Charlie's ride, this manufacturing process had to be believable and genuine. Decorum was fulfilled. The Senate was asked to give their blessing, and everything was very above board. Only very recently have a few of the architects of this war come out and express regret. Regret at the falsified intelligence, the needless death, and the utilization of fear many normal Americans had of terrorism, especially in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. 9/11 had nothing to do with Hussein, but it did create a sense of hostility, specifically to any brown person in the Middle East. Now, I've been a little gentle on those who believed this story. To many, it was easy to see right through. Many people think this whole episode to be one of the clearest displays of American imperialism since World War II. Many believed that it could not get more blatant than ousting Hussein. Those people would be incorrect. I'd like to talk about January 3rd of this year. We wake up and holy shit, Donald Trump has authorized military strikes that killed over 40 Venezuelan citizens and did millions of dollars of damage. The Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, was summarily kidnapped, blindfolded, and handcuffed, and thrown on a plane headed for New York City. He would stand trial for something? Regardless, the United States would be in charge of the governmental operations of the country until things got settled and a new leader was chosen. This was a swift, orderly, and self-contained operation that bore striking resemblance to classic 20th century imperialism. Now, I will not act as if this was the first time Americans found out that Trump didn't love the admin of Venezuela. He had previously dropped breadcrumbs concerning Maduro being a dictator and a drug smuggler. Trump had pushed the idea that he supported Maduro no longer being in charge and that the US would continue to sanction the country going forward. However, to most people, this invasion and takeover of a sovereign nation came entirely by surprise. A coup 3 days into the year from an administration that talked endlessly about focusing more on domestic affairs seemed unlikely. Even to someone like me, who is relatively up to date on geopolitics, I was blindsided a bit. We've been discussing how stories are woven in order to justify the actions of the government, from eliminating fairs to blacklisting supposed communists, but this to me felt a little different. The public, I think, was not fully ready to accept an invasion into a sovereign Latin American country. Among my apolitical friends, the most popular emotion was confusion. The story had not been properly conveyed like it had been in the case of Iraq. Simply put, it seemed that people's consent had not been sufficiently manufactured. Now, the White House immediately went into story writing mode. The administration's auxiliary staff and those pundits on the internet and in the press who supported this move told us something like this. This is a story about the spirit of the United States, the people that make up the greatest country on the planet. It is 2026. Our country is still suffering from massive illegal immigration, and the horrifying opiate crisis has continued to ravage our nation's youth as drugs flow over our southern border. One of the adversaries responsible for this is a nation which threatens not only the safety of our great people, but also the very way of life we hold so dear. To the south, one of our former allies, Venezuela, is attempting to poison Latin America through their ideology of radical socialist authoritarianism and poison us through the government's coordinated efforts to send illegal drugs into the United States, hooking addicts and destroying communities. It was imperative that we captured Maduro and put him on a trial stateside to answer for his horrendous crimes. We, of course, will graciously assist Venezuela in picking a new leader. We want nothing but the best for the Venezuelan people. This was not the story told by Donald Trump himself, however. His message was, as it often is, much simpler. This is a story about power. Nicolas Maduro is a bad leader who runs his country poorly and hates the United States. I don't like that. I don't like him. I have the political will and the overwhelming military might to easily oust him and begin a regime change. I think this is the right move, so it is the right move. This is not about securing a better future for Venezuelans. This is about the oil that I believe the US deserves. Securing this coup secures us right to that oil.
The oil that has been seized. The United States seized 1.9 million barrels of oil on December 10th.
We're going to keep it. We're keeping it.
Where's it? Are we going to sell it or put it in the strategic?
Maybe
oil
we'll sell
reserve?
it. Maybe we'll keep it. Maybe we'll use it in the strategic reserves. We're keeping it. We're keeping the ships also. Yeah.
This is an incredible shift in rhetoric from the king of shifts in rhetoric. Trump is not even laying out a story here. He is just clearly informing us of what he would like to do. This action is not strange. The US has carried out similar military operations for similar regions in countries like Iraq, Guatemala, the Congo, Chile, DR, Grenada, Panama, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Bolivia. Okay, I'm gonna stop now because I'm sure this video is already pretty long. What is different here is the absence of a story, or at least a good one. Donald Trump and the administration banked on the idea that he could take over another country in broad daylight, and that Americans, even without being primed to accept it, would not care. It hurts me to say that I think he was right. I think we have reached a moment in which consent need not be manufactured because of the hyper-tribalism of modern politics. With Iraq, the war criminals responsible tactically acknowledged that even war hawks in the body politic would need convincing and worried about so-called progressive Republicans crossing over and joining Democrats in opposition to a very lucrative war. Today, the right-wingers have dug in so incredibly deep that nothing will shake them of their convictions. They have to believe. Because acknowledging anything else, acknowledging the truth, would create a cascade of cognitive dissonance and lead to a disintegration of the structure of their social identity. Don't believe me? 2 American citizens were viciously executed by masked men earlier this year. These executions, which were caught on video and widely distributed, laid bare the senseless nature of the acts, and the bone-chilling response from the administration was that the 37-year-old poet and dental assistant and the 37-year-old VA nurse were terrorists? This was still enough. Those who supported Trump and ICE backed both of these extrajudicial murders and ramped up violent rhetoric. This isn't only an issue with those on the right. I had a conversation with my cousin, a staunch Democrat, in which I told her how many people Obama had murdered in drone strikes throughout Yemen, Iraq, and Afghanistan. She simply would not believe me, no matter how much data I showed her. It is an understandable psychological phenomenon, but the idea that truth can so readily be discarded to protect our own beliefs is a really, really bad sign. The rhetoric all around is foreboding. The murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy were drowned out by justifications before they were even transported to a morgue. People are more afraid than ever to believe the truth of their own positions. They are only growing more emboldened to speak insidiously about the opposition. The techniques of politics and complex government oppression are being stripped away. This somewhat connects to my first video, as during it I touched on the idea that Donald Trump's election brought in a new era of brash and open rhetoric. This is not only present at the social level of our society, but also at the governmental one. The fact that so little work lately has gone into covering up the crimes of this current administration is truly baffling. While Donald Trump is a unique actor in some respects, quite a lot of his policies have been the bipartisan norm for decades. What has been lost is the veil of decency and the careful creation of stories for the American people. As I'm writing this, Donald Trump is seriously considering the prospect of acquiring Greenland. Again, there is little to no story being spun around this. Donald Trump is lately hinting at some concerns around national security and Greenland's proximity to Russia and China, but really, he is focused on this messaging.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not. I would like to make a deal, the easy way, but if we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way.
He just wants Greenland because it has valuable resources, is in a strategic spot for international trade, and he's pissed at NATO. Suffice it to say, it seems that the admin has given up trying to manufacture consent for its geopolitical atrocities. This, to the older order of progressives, is one of, if not the most horrifying staples of Trumpism. He accompanies his fascist action with disgusting messages. He instructs those around him to act nastily, malignantly, and viciously, tearing apart anyone that comes between them and their political objective. The common refrain is, "The civility of politics has been washed away." I remember from a very young age, I always wondered what was meant by that. For nearly the entirety of the US's existence, we have descended upon other nations with hellfire and burned their cities into sand. For even longer than that, we have been desecrating the very meaning of freedom by shackling, beating, and murdering people of color. I truly wondered when politics was ever civil. The liberals would answer that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and even Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush had civility, that being that they spoke politely and were more cunning political actors. For the past 7 years, I've been wondering, was this civility providing a benefit or detriment to the people of this country? I know that we all want our leaders to sound and look and talk like professionals. We want them to be gentle yet firm in difficult times and guide us carefully through hardships into booming economies and social order. We want the decorum we are used to, and when people disagree, we want them to do so respectfully, even if they are bitter rivals. So, here's my opinion. While this window dressing makes us feel good, it does a great job of separating citizens from the actions they endorse or support. Now, I'm not saying that Trump's rhetoric in general is respectful, or that it would be better for us to come out and say, "I don't give a fuck about Charlie and I hope he's on the MTA forever," but saying, "We really appreciate everyone's concerned around Charlie and are working hard to remedy the situation," is more deceitful. The fact is that politicians for so long have been known to be deeply fraudulent. When Barack Obama or George H.W. Bush spoke about bringing stability to the Middle East through coordinated efforts with local militias, while utilizing intelligence obtained through multinational operations, what that looked like in practice was murdering thousands of civilians in the region in order to protect U.S. business interests and maintain a strategic foothold in the region to dispel our larger and more powerful enemies from doing the same. When we heard from Bill Clinton about cleaning up the more dangerous urban areas of the US by implementing stricter and more comprehensive sentences and funding law enforcement to finally create an atmosphere of safety and rid the streets of the worst, what that meant in practice was unleashing hordes of militarized police to poverty-stricken neighborhoods where they would kill, beat, and profile innocent citizens or arrest individuals for having a blunt in their pocket. It meant cramming people of color into for-profit prisons, whose donors and lobbyists paid massively for such legislation, and having the American taxpayer cover the cost of such an atrocious operation. In both cases, the American voter gets to distance themselves from the reality of these policies. They get to understand political violence through civility. The state proclaims that it alone has the monopoly on violence. Yet the candy-coated rhetoric of politicians makes this monopoly much more palatable. When violence happens, it is out of sight. And at the end of the day, what Obama said or what Bush said is vague. Usefully vague. One of the most freeing experiences of my life was when I decided to cease judging governmental officials by what they say and judge them solely off of what they have done or what they did not do. We seem to give politicians such a long leash as to why they could not get this or that done, especially when their rhetoric asserts that they are really trying. Perhaps, though, they did not get it done because they do not want to get it done. These blurry promises become a lot clearer with our once-in-a-lifetime president, Donald Trump. He has not only torn out the decorum of how we talk to each other about politics, but additionally how politicians message. Many of them, especially on the right, have now adopted this practice of simply saying what they mean and meaning what they say. When a man is murdered in cold blood by jackbooted thugs in Minneapolis, right-wingers don't tiptoe around it or try and tell us a special story. They say, that guy shouldn't have interfered in what ICE was doing. The reality is that violence is necessary and will befall some of you. It is my personal belief that even though this discourse is grotesque in content, it allows better comprehension by the body politic. Simply put, we can understand the problem better, and the awareness as to the necessity to root it out grows. It is very scary to see our leaders be authoritarian and fascistic, but they have always been this way, on the left and the right, and at least now, those who are usually less skeptical have to acknowledge the sick nature of the American empire. The stories are falling apart, and I think it is good. So back to our lovely Charlie. Charlie has since become a myth. The only remnant of this political song is that of the Charlie card, the official smart card that allows you to access Boston Metro trains. Although the fares nowadays would probably give Charlie a heart attack. Charlie's story, however, gives us a roadmap to understanding political action. One could make the assumption by my analysis and conclusions in this video that I believe stories have no positive place in politics. But that would be very incorrect. Stories are all we have. That's why I'm making it my life goal to tell stories to high school students. Well, in my opinion, political stories like Charlie's have been utilized much more for harm than good. The stories that sit in our hearts and drive us toward political action can never be ignored. Each of us has our own little historical anecdotes. The bravery of a peasant standing up against oppressors, the diligence of an immigrant trying to build a better life for their family, the organized action of social groups that gave blood, sweat, and tears to their cause. These anecdotes motivate us. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to leave her seat on a bus when asked to move to the back for a white man. This inspired the now famous Montgomery bus boycotts and was one of the catalysts for the broader civil rights movements in the United States. This is a story with many caveats, none of which are mentioned in our middle school history classes. Rosa Parks' refusal, arrest, and fame were not accidental, but carefully organized by the NAACP for months. Many other Black Americans had acted similarly to Parks, and yet received very little press. However, with Parks, activist groups were ready to spring into action to publicize the story and utilize it for the beginnings of social transformation. Does this mean that the sentiment behind the Montgomery bus boycott is not important? Does this mean that Rosa Parks is a con woman? Of course not. Without this organization and the carefully constructed conditions surrounding Rosa Parks' arrest, the civil rights movement may not have exploded internationally as it did. Here we have a good story, an important story, that holds in it some falsehood, some distance from the truth. Rosa Parks did not spontaneously refuse to give up her seat simply because she had reached her limit of dealing with racist transit policy. Similarly, Charlie did not exist, and certainly never got stuck in a train for all of eternity. But we who hear these stories collapse that distance from the truth via our ability to relate. Many had felt like Parks on that December morning, and many do feel like Charlie, having their pockets emptied out by their city's respective transit authority. I really don't think we will ever stop telling stories, and I hope we never do. Politics, art, sports, all of these are stories. Let's try to continue to engage and boost those that lift our hearts up and lead us to believe that a better world is possible, even if that belief is sometimes foolish. Thank you for being part of the human story with me, and thank you for watching.
Where have all the young girls gone? Taken husbands, everyone. When will we ever learn? When will we ever learn? Where have all the young men gone?
Thank you for watching this video. I really enjoy making them, and I would love any feedback or suggestions for a song or a topic of analysis. But I really, if you watched this far, thank you so much. And I know that I didn't touch on the invasion of Iran, but I think this analysis is still useful. So, thank you guys. Bye.
When will we ever learn? When will we